Little Billy's mother was always telling him exactly what he was allowed to do and what he was not allowed to do. All the things he was allowed to do were boring. All the things he was not allowed to do were exciting. One of the things he was never allowed to do, the most exciting of them all, was to go out through the garden gate all by himself and explore the world beyond. On this sunny summer day, Little Billy was kneeling on a chair in the living room, gazing out through the window at the wonderful world beyond. His mother was in the kitchen doing the ironing, and although the door was open, she couldn't see him. Every now and again his mother would call out to him, saying, "Little Billy, what are you up to in there?" And Little Billy would always call back and say, "I'm being good, Mummy." But Little Billy was awfully tired of being good. Through the window, not so very far away, he could see the big black secret wood that was called the Forest of Sin. It was something he had always longed to explore. His mother had told him that even grown-ups were frightened of going into the Forest of Sin. She recited a poem to him that was well known in the district. It went like this: "Beware, beware the Forest of Sin, none come out but many go in." "Why don't they come out?" Little Billy asked her. "What happens to them in the wood?" "That wood," his mother said, "is full of the most bloodthirsty wild beasts in the world." "You mean tigers and lions?" Little Billy asked. "Much worse than that," his mother said. "What's worse than tigers and lions, Mummy?" "Whangdoodles are worse," his mother said, "and hornswogglers, and snozwanglers, and vermicious nids. And worst of all is the terrible, blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling spiddler. There's one of them in there, too." "A spiddler, Mummy?" "Of course. And when the spiddler chases after you, he blows clouds of hot smoke out of his nose." "Would he eat me up?" Little Billy asked. "In one gulp," his mother said. Little Billy did not believe one word of this. He guessed his mother was making it all up just to frighten him, and had to stop him from ever going out of the house alone. And now Little Billy was kneeling on the chair, gazing with longing through the window at the famous Forest of Sin. "Little Billy," his mother called, out from the kitchen. "What are you doing?" "I'm being good, Mummy," Little Billy called back. Just then a funny thing happened. Little Billy began to hear somebody whispering in his ear. He knew exactly who it was. It was the devil. The devil always started whispering to him when he was especially bored. "It would be easy," the whisper said, "to climb out that window. No one would see you. And in a jiffy, you'd be in the garden. In another jiffy, you'd be through the front gate. And in yet another jiffy, you'd be exploring the marvelous Forest of Sin all by yourself. It's a super place. Don't believe one word of what your mother says about whangdoodles and hornswogglers and snozwanglers and vermicious nids and the terrible blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling spiddler. There's no such things." "What is in there?" Little Billy whispered. "Wild strawberries," the devil whispered back. "The whole floor of the forest is carpeted with wild strawberries. Every one of them is luscious and red and juicy ripe. Go, see for yourself." These were the words whispered softly into Little Billy's ear on that sunny summer afternoon. The next moment Little Billy had opened the window and was climbing out. In a jiffy he had dropped silently onto the flower bed below. In another jiffy he was out through the garden gate. And in yet another jiffy he was standing on the very edge of the great big dark Forest of Sin. He'd made it. He had got there. And now the forest was all his to explore. Was he nervous? What? Who said anything about being nervous? Hornswogglers, vermicious nids. What sort of rubbish was that? Little Billy hesitated. I'm not nervous," he said. "I'm not in the least bit nervous. Not me." Very, very slowly, he walked forward into the great forest. Giant trees were soon surrounding him on all sides, and their branches made an almost solid roof high above his head. Blotting out the sky, here and there little shafts of sunlight shone through the gaps in the roof. There was not a sound anywhere. It was like being among the dead men in an enormous, empty, green cathedral. When he had ventured some distance into the forest, Little Billy stopped and stood quite still, listening. He could hear nothing. Nothing at all. There was absolute silence. Or was there? Hold on just 1 second. What was that? Little Billy flicked his head round and stared into the everlasting gloom and doom of the forest. There it was again. No mistaking it this time. From far away there came a very faint whoozing, whiffling noise, like a small gusty wind blowing through the trees. And then it grew louder. Every second it was growing louder, and suddenly it was no longer a small wind. It was a fearsome, swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise that sounded as though some gigantic creature was breathing heavily through its nose as it galloped toward him. Little Billy turned and ran. Little Billy ran faster than he had ever run in his life before, but the swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise was coming after him. Worse still, it was getting louder. This meant that the thing, the maker of the noise, the galloping creature, was getting closer. It was catching him up. "Run, little Billy, run, run, run!" He dodged around massive trees. He skipped over roots and brambles. He bent low to flash under boughs and bushes. He had wings on his feet, he ran so fast. But still the fearsome swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise grew louder and louder as it came closer and closer. Little Billy glanced back quickly over his shoulder, and now, in the distance, he saw a sight that froze his blood and made icicles in his veins. What he saw were two mighty puffs of orange-red smoke billowing and rolling through the trees in his direction. These were followed by two more, whoosh, whoosh, and then two more, whoosh, whoosh. They surely must be coming, little Billy told himself, from the two nose holes of some galloping, panting beast that had smelled him out and was coming after him. His mother's words began thrumming once again in his head. "Beware, beware the forest of sin. None come out, but many go in." "It's the Spiddler for sure," little Billy cried. "Mummy said the Spiddler blows smoke when it chases you. This one is blowing smoke. It's the terrible, blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spiddler, and soon it will catch me up, and I'll be blood-suckled and tooth-plucked and stone-chuckled and chewed up into tiny bits, and then the Spiddler will spit me out in a cloud of smoke, and that will be the end of me." Little Billy was running with the speed of an arrow, but each time he glanced back over his shoulder, the puffs of orange-red, smoky breath had gotten closer. They were so close now he could feel the wind of them on the back of his neck. And the noise! It was deafening in his ears, this fearsome, swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, panting noise. Whoomp, whoomp, it went. Whoomp, 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 whoomp. It was like the noise made by a steam locomotive pulling out from a station. Then suddenly he heard another noise that was somehow more fearsome still. It was the pounding of gigantic galloping hooves on the floor of the forest. He glanced round again, but the thing, the beast, the monster, whatever it was hidden from his sight by the smoke it shot out as it galloped forward. The smoky breath was billowing all around him now. He could feel its hotness, and worse still, he could smell its smell. The smell was disgusting. It was a stench that comes from deep inside the tummy of a meat-eating animal. "Mommy!" he cried out. "Save me!" Suddenly, directly in front of him, little Billy saw the trunk of an enormous tree. This tree was different from the others because it had branches hanging down very low. While still running, he made a frantic jump for its lowest branch. He caught it and pulled himself up. Then he grabbed the next branch above his head and pulled himself up again. Then again and again, climbing higher and higher to get away from the terrible, snorting, smoke-blowing, smelly-breathed beast down below. He stopped climbing only when he was too exhausted to climb any higher. He looked up, but even now he couldn't see the top of the giant tree. It seemed to go on forever. He looked down. He couldn't see the ground either. He was in a world of green leaves and thick, smooth branches with no earth or sky in sight. The snorting, smelly, smoke-blowing heat beast was miles below, down somewhere. He couldn't even hear it anymore. Little Billy found a comfortable place where two big branches came together, and he sat down to rest. For the moment, at any rate, he was safe. And something very peculiar happened. There was a huge, smooth branch very close to where little Billy was sitting, and he suddenly noticed that a small square patch of bark on this branch was beginning to move. It was a very small patch, about the size of a postage stamp, and the two sides of it seemed to be splitting down the middle and opening slowly outwards, like a pair of shutters on a tiny window. Little Billy sat staring at this extraordinary thing, and all at once a strange, uncomfortable feeling came over him. It felt as though the tree he was sitting in and the green leaves all around him belonged to another world altogether, and that he was a trespasser who had no right to be where he was. He watched intently as the tiny shutters of tree bark opened wider and wider, and when they were fully open they revealed a small squarish window set neatly in the curve of the big branch. There was some sort of yellowish glow coming from deep inside the window. The very next thing Little Billy saw was a tiny face at the window. It had appeared suddenly, from nowhere, and it was the face of an extremely old man with white hair. Little Billy could see this clearly despite the fact that the whole of the tiny man's head was no larger than a pea. This ancient miniature face was staring straight at Little Billy with the most severe expression on it. The skin on the face was deeply wrinkled all over, but the eyes were as bright as two stars. Now something even more peculiar began to happen. All around him, not only on the huge main trunk of the tree, but also on all the big branches that grew out of it, other tiny windows were opening and tiny faces were peering out. Some of these faces belonged to men and others were clearly women. Here and there the head of a child was seen, peering over a windowsill. The heads of these children were no larger than the heads of matchsticks. In the end, there must have been more than 20 small windows all around where Little Billy was sitting, and from each window these amazing little faces were peering out. No sound came from any of the watchers. The faces were silent, unmoving, almost ghost-like. Now the tiny old man in the window nearest to Billy seemed to be saying something. But his voice was so soft and whispery, Little Billy had to lean right up close to catch his words. "You're in a bit of a twizzler, aren't you?" the voice was saying. "You can't go down again because if you do, you'll be guzzled up at once. But you can't possibly sit up here forever either." I know, Little Billy gasped. "Oh, don't shout," the tiny man said. "I'm not shouting," said Little Billy. "Talk softer," the tiny man said. "If you talk too loud, your voice will blow me away." But who are you?" Little Billy asked, taking care to speak very softly this time. "We are the Minpins," the tiny man said, "and we own this wood. I shall come closer, then you will hear me better." The old Minpin climbed out of his window and walked straight down the big steep slope branch and then up another branch until he found a place only a few inches from Little Billy's face. It was amazing to see him walking up and down these almost vertical branches without the slightest trouble. It was like seeing someone walking up and down a wall. "How on earth do you do that?" Little Billy asked. "Suction boots," the Minpin said. "We all wear them. You can't live in trees without suction boots." On his feet he was wearing tiny green boots, rather like miniature wellies. His clothes were curiously old-fashioned, mostly brown and black, the sort of thing people wore 200 or 300 years ago. Suddenly, all the other Minpins, men, women, and children, were climbing out of their windows and making their way toward Little Billy. Their suction boots seemed to allow them to walk up and down the steepest branches with the greatest ease, and some were even walking upside down, underneath the branches. All of them were wearing these old-fashioned clothes from hundreds of years ago, and several had on very peculiar hats and bonnets. They stood or sat in groups on all the branches around Little Billy, staring at him as though he were someone from outer space. "But do all of you actually live inside this tree?" Little Billy asked. The old Minpin said, "All the trees in this forest are hollow, not just this one, but all of them, and inside them thousands and thousands of Minpins are living. These great trees are filled with rooms and staircases, not just in the big main trunk, but in most other branches as well. This is a Minpin forest, and it's not the only one in England." "Can I peep inside?" Little Billy said. Of course, the old Minpin said. "Put your eye close to that window." He pointed to the one he had just come out of. Little Billy shifted his position and placed one eye right up against a little square hole that was no bigger than a postage stamp. What he now saw was quite marvelous. He saw a room that was lit by a pale yellow light of some sort, and it was furnished with beautifully made miniature chairs and a table. To one side was a four-poster bed. It was like one of the rooms Little Billy had once seen in the Queen's dollhouse at Windsor Castle. "It's beautiful," Little Billy said. "Are they all as lovely as this one?" "Most are smaller," the old Minpin said. "This one is very grand because I am the ruler of this tree. My name is Dahl. What's yours?" "Mine is Little Billy," Little Billy said. "Greetings, Little Billy," Dahl said. "You are welcome to look into some of the other rooms if you wish. We are very proud of them." All the other Minpins began to want to show Billy their own rooms. They rushed about along the branches, calling out, "Come see mine! Please, please, come and see mine!"